Hi, everybody. We're live over here from Visual Wilderness, episode 3, and today we're going to talk a little bit about assignment, and our first assignment is shallow depth of field. So I will turn it over to Verena.
So we were supposed to have Johnny Spencer with us here tonight, and we've been sitting here having technical problems for the past half an hour. We could not get him in, so we're sorry, you guys, that he can't be here tonight, and I know he is sorely disappointed to be missing out. Bummer. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to show you how the assignments work. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk about the theme for this month's assignment and just sort of show you how it works. So we're going to keep it pretty low-key and easygoing. And if you guys have questions, we have our little Q&A box open, and hopefully Jay's going to be paying attention to that while I share my screen.
I will pay attention to it.
Excellent. Okay. Let me make sure. All right, can you see what I'm doing over here? Hopefully,
it's coming up.
You should be able to see my screen now.
Yep, we are able to see your screen.
Very good. Okay, so let's talk about assignments. What are we going to do with this on Visual Wilderness? What's the point? How does it work? I'm going to start by sort of showing you what it looks like on the website. You can see I'm here on the Visual Wilderness website, and we have the current assignment showing here, and then we have some of the upcoming assignments for April, May, June, and July. Now, when you click on the current assignment, it brings up a new window. This month, March, our assignment is shallow depth of field. And you'll see a collection of sample images, so you sort of start to get an idea of what it's all about. And then we'll always have this objective section. We'll explain very briefly what the assignment is about. You'll notice when you get into this that our assignments tend to have very few rules. We're not trying to make it difficult for people. We're not trying to make it complicated. The goal is to learn something. So in this case, we're working with Aperture. We want people to start getting used to their manual mode. We have a lot of people who aren't using that yet, and if you can get used to the manual mode on your camera and start to really understand how it works, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of where you were when you were using auto. It gives you so much control that you didn't have before. So this is just our first step into that, and we have here the images that I talked about. Now, the way this works is that you'll have a list of rules here. If I click on this little box, it opens up the rules section. The rules are going to be pretty much the same each time. So once you've got it down, you probably won't need to come back here very often. If
Verena,
we change...
Can I interrupt? Yes. Can you
yes,
make the box, the screen larger? Is it the full size?
That's as big as it gets.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. How about if I do this? Does that help?
Yes.
I zoom in? Okay.
Yep.
Great. Is that big enough? I can zoom in a little more if necessary.
That's perfect. Thanks.
All right, perfect. So here we have the rules. As I said, if they change at all, what we'll do is we'll post a little comment, send out a notification, and let people know that there's been a rule change so they can look into that. For now, we're happy with them as they are, and we'll leave it as it stands. Now, the other thing that we have here is our need help getting started box, and if you go into there, you'll see I've written up a little bit extra here, and I'll provide 3 or 4 links each month to give you a little bit more information about depth of field. About, in this case, depth of field and Aperture, but you know, about whatever it is that we're talking about for that particular assignment. So this is where the really valuable stuff is if you're unsure of how to get started. And we'll always have that included with our assignments. Now, you can see that people have already started to submit for this assignment. We're really excited to see the interest that we're already getting, and you can see that even from these tiny little thumbnails how beautiful some of these images are. So this is really cool. We have everybody here from beginners to advanced photographers. There's a wide range, and all of us are trying to learn. And I say all of us, and I include Jay and I in that too. We never stop learning. So we're learning from people here too. It's great. So Jay and I, sorry, Jay, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to point out one thing is that in case when we have assignments which require you to use files that we provide. For example, the raw assignment coming up, we will provide you with a file. There will be another one of those little sections below that will show you how to download those files. So if I were to go to Verina's screen right now, um, there is a download section, and if you click on it, there'll be a button to download the file, and if you click on that, and it'll download the file for you, and you can get started with the assignments that way as well. So it depends on what the assignment is. We will give you appropriate files to get started. We will give you um, other information for the assignments as needed. So just keep an eye on the box, and it'll be different, a little bit different for each assignment. Sorry, sweetheart.
That's okay. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's an important point. You can see here on my screen that I have the May assignment up here, and for in May, what we're going to be doing is taking a single raw file and looking at the different ways that you can process it. The objective here, the goal is to sort of give people a chance to start working with the tools that they have, whatever it is, Photoshop or Lightroom or other software for processing. And each of the images that people are going to come up with, I think, are going to be really different. You can see we have 6 examples already of different ways this one image can be processed. So we'll start you with the download that Jay pointed out, and you take that and you go with it and you play with it. So that'll be another one of the assignments that we do, totally different from what we're doing this month. And you can see we have an assignment on details coming up in April. That raw processing assignment is scheduled for May. In June, we have an assignment on moving subjects. And in July, we're going to be working with a single color, which is maybe one of my favorite things to do in photography. So, Jay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the images that we've put up here to show, and I want to talk about how we're using depth of field in these photos and what it is about the photos that we chose specifically and why we chose them to showcase them. Why don't you go ahead and start with this image from Tom McCall Nature Preserve in Oregon?
All right, so one of the things that you will notice in the assignments that we have submitted is we have submitted 2 different classes of image in depth of field. One is the class of image which uses wide angle lens, and the other class of image uses sort of narrow zoom lens. Now, when you say shallow depth of field, it's easy to create shallow depth of field with a zoom lens because all you have to do is just get close to your subject and everything else blows out. But when you are creating a depth of field and a shallow depth of field, think about why you are creating a shallow depth of field, what impact it has on the viewers. So for this particular photo that you see on the screen, what I wanted to do was I was here in this absolutely breathtaking place with Tom McCall Preserve in Oregon, with all kinds of beautiful flowers in there. And my objective was to be able to create a dreamy look for the viewers. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting close to a cluster of flowers and selecting the depth of field so that that cluster of the flowers was in focus. And then rest of it kind of fades out. So it isn't just randomly just getting close to it and selecting an aperture that you like. It is selecting an aperture and the distance of the subject to be able to create an effect that you desire.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and look at some of the others. I think you're going to find that that's a pretty common theme here. When I use a narrow depth of field, I'm often looking to create that same sort of sense of dreaminess or sort of a softness that changes the mood of the photo. In this case, this image is from Jökulsárlón in Iceland. And on this particular morning, there was very little color in the sky. There was just one area in the distance that had turned this brilliant, smooth pink color. And I was trying to figure out how I wanted to frame my shot, what I wanted to do with it. I already had several photos of the icebergs with the whole scene, looking amazing. And I felt like I was lacking photos of the details. And I mean, if you look at this shot, you can see how incredible these details are in the ice. I wanted to make sure that those details were the most important thing. I wanted you to notice the shapes and the patterns, the reflected light. The light it's dancing through this ice. It's incredible. And the difference between sort of the smooth areas and then the rougher ice, the very deep blacks in the ice, very bright whites in the ice, all that. And at the same time, I wanted to give just a little bit of a sense of place. So it actually took me about 10 minutes to get my camera exactly where I wanted it. Because, a millimeter to the left and those mountains in the distance were behind the little piece of ice sticking up on the left, a millimeter to the right, and they were behind the little pointy piece. It was really difficult to get it just where I wanted it. I had to go up a little, down a little, back and forth. And when I finally got it exactly where I wanted it, then I had to make sure that I had the aperture I was looking for, because I didn't want those mountains in the distance to distract from the foreground. I wanted them to complement the foreground. So I was looking for a very narrow depth of field, not so narrow that they blurred out completely. I still wanted some definition in the background. I could have done this and made it impossible for you to tell what was happening in the background except for very, very blurred out color. But I wanted a little bit of definition. So that's where experimentation comes in, and that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. I tried this shot with 4 or 5 different settings, kind of going back and forth, shifting my angle just a tiny bit, changing my aperture, and in the end, this is the one I chose because of the way the mountains behind are just enough detail to really make them an important part of the image without letting them overwhelm. So Jay, do you want to talk about this shot of yours?
So this is an interesting shot from a depth of field perspective. It isn't really one of my favorite shots. It doesn't even make you go, wow. However, what it does do is it showcases a technology that not a whole lot of people know about or use. This particular shot was taken with a 90mm lens. However, the 90mm lens that I used was a tilt shift lens. So what I was able to do was that use the tilt shift lens to adjust the lens in such a position so that the background became more dreamier than otherwise it would have been with a normal lens. So one of the great things to do with a tilt shift lens is to be able to use a tilt shift lens, a wide angle or a long lens, to be able to create a dreamy background, a more dreamy background than it is possible with just a normal lens. And a lot of the videographers will actually use that technique to create a soft look in their videos whenever, even though you have a harsh light at times. So, so an interesting shot, not quite a spectacular shot, but it actually gives you some idea of what you can do with a longer lens or a specialty lens that occurs that you can get your hands on. David has a comment on it. He says that he likes the details of ice contrasted with the softness in the background.
Thank you, David. Yeah, and I wanted to add to what Jay said about the tilt shift lens. This is a specialty lens. We actually don't recommend that you go out and buy a tilt shift lens right away. We recommend that you rent a tilt shift lens, try it out, play with it for a while. We actually rented this tilt shift from lensrentals.com. They're great. They're easy to work with, and we always use their services. And so they sent us out actually a couple of tilt shift lenses. We used those while we were in Iceland, loved them. And that's the thing about a lens like that. It's expensive. It's a specialty lens. It's something that you have to get used to. You have to learn how to use it. And until you've tried it out, it's really hard to, for us to recommend that people go buy such an expensive lens. Try it out first, rent it first, try out Lens Rentals, and they'll send it to you perfect condition. You use it for a few days, send it back, and you haven't put a whole lot of money into something that you're not sure you're going to use.
So Ratul has another question. What aperture did you use for the eye shot?
That is a good question. I can look that up. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open Bridge and just take a look at it.
Why don't you take a look at it? I want to talk a little bit about that eye shot.
Okay.
So one of the things to notice about the eye shot is it was taken with a longer lens, and the horizon in the background is fairly close. I'm not sure if those are mountains or those are clouds. I think they're mountains because Raina said they're mountains.
They're mountains.
I wasn't paying attention to where she was shooting, so. But one of the things you can do with shallow depth of field is, let's say you take a pane of glass and you spray a bunch of water in it, or and put it in your freezer, and after a few hours you pull it out and you'll have beautiful crystallization on the glass. And all you have to do is just go out in the backyard, stick it in front of your camera, and you will get a similar effect with awesome details in the foreground and a really nice background that you can select, whether it be flowers or the field, or if there's a spring where you live, you can do that. But that gives you a sort of a sense of what can be accomplished. I've seen photographs that were taken from a window of a car with raindrops and this wide angle view of the outside world looking through the rainy window. I've seen photographs taken from an airplane that are like that with a sunset. Um, so, so cellular depth of field is a wide open area for creativity that you can come away with an enormous amount of photos.
Yeah, definitely. And I did look that up. Was that Ratul who asked the question?
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to be surprised at this, but this is actually the aperture I chose for this is f/16. Now the reason f/16 worked, most of the time, of course, you'd think of f/16 as something that would give you a more depth of field, but I'm actually using a long lens for this, and I'm extremely close to my subject. That's why the depth of field is so narrow. That and the fact, of course, that the mountains are so far away. Okay, so f/16 for this shot. Now, here's a shot where I used a much narrower aperture. This is I'm guessing here because I don't have the metadata in front of me, but this shot was probably taken with f/4. And what I did here, this is a macro lens. I got in close. You can see that the petals themselves are actually not completely sharp. And I did that intentionally. I chose to make sure that the leaves and the little green leaves are the ones I'm talking about here, that they fade out, because I love the softness that a macro lens gives me. But this is actually a blended shot. I wanted the aperture so narrow, but I also wanted to make sure that I had the little yellow stamens in the center nice and sharp, and also the red leaves nice and sharp. So I took two shots, one to make sure the center was sharp and one for the little red petals, and then I blended those just to be sure. Now the background is very, very soft, and I chose the aperture I did because I wanted to simplify. That's one of the other big reasons why I choose a narrow depth of field or a wide aperture. I like wide apertures. I like the narrow depth of field because it gives me a background that is so clean and so smooth, this butter soft background, and it takes away distracting elements. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of these others. The other two are also mine, so I'm going to go ahead and talk through those, and I'll try not to take too much longer here. But this shot is from Colorado. This is Marble, Colorado. Beautiful up there. And this is a high-key black and white conversion. The original image is, that brilliant yellow that you get in the fall up there. But for this image, I wanted to show texture. I wanted the image to be about texture, so I converted it to black and white. Now, what I did in this case, and I want to point this out when we talk about depth of field, because it's important to realize that anything on the same plane will have the same depth of field. So the trees, or I'm sorry, the same sharpness. So the tree in the foreground here is very close to me, and I made sure that there were no other trees at the same distance from my lens. The trees in the background are much further away, and they all fade out because they're pretty much on the same plane. Now, there is another tree in this photo, believe it or not, but it's hiding behind that tree in the foreground. If I had shifted just a little bit to the left or to the right, the tree that was really in the midground here would have been sharper than the trees in the background, not as sharp as the trees in the foreground, and it would be very distracting. So I moved my camera so that that tree, the one tree that was really out of place in this composition, was hidden. I wanted to make sure you couldn't see it. Okay, so a lot of times when we choose our aperture, we're doing it either because we want to create a smooth, gentle, dreamy effect, or because we want to hide something. And in this case, it's very simple. I wanted to hide the details in the background so that you would pay attention to the details in the foreground. Okay. And finally, one last image. This is another example of a wide angle shot, and I chose a very narrow aperture for this because I wanted to bring out the details in the flowers in the foreground, make the photo all about those flowers, and let the background fade out. Jay and I wanted to be sure to include a couple of wide angle shots because I think a lot of times, Jay, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this one, people think of shallow depth of field when they use a macro lens or when they're shooting details. You don't think about it a lot when you're shooting wide angle because it's so easy to get everything in your frame sharp when you're shooting with a wide angle lens. Unless, of course, you're getting very, very close to your foreground. In that case, that's a whole different issue, and we start talking about hyperfocal distance and that kind of thing, which we're not going to go into because it's too broad a concept for this hangout. Jay, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do want to go back to that shot that you were showing with a blended shot.
This one?
Yes. So I wanted to add something to this is, remember, focus is a choice. Whether to use a sharp focus in your image or whether to use a shallow focus in your image is a creative choice that you have to make. Today we have techniques like focus stacking available that can make everything that you see in the image like this pretty sharp. But whether that is a right thing to do or not a right thing to do is an artistic decision that you have to make. There are 2 articles on our blog, and I think I will go ahead maybe tomorrow or on Monday. We'll add it into the sections of the articles that one of them talks about focus as a creative choice. And another one talks about the exact same thing that Marina was talking about in this image that says that oftentimes your subject matter is such that you want a certain sharpness that cannot be achieved with a single aperture. So if you end up using f/16 as a aperture, you will get more details in the background coming into your shot. So what you ended up doing is taking 2 different shots at 2 different apertures and blending them together to create an effect that is desired. This is particularly true for things that you cannot move, macro subjects that cannot be moved. So macro subjects that has other distractions, very close proximity with one another.
Yeah, as long as your subject is stationary, it's relatively easy to do. If you, of course, if you're shooting a moving subject, getting 2 shots where your subject is in the same position for blending is going to be pretty much impossible.
So, so when you're doing this assignment, think about all those creative options you have. Think about how much depth of field you want to do, and objective is, yeah, to showcase shallow depth of field, but showcasing shallow depth of field in itself doesn't accomplish anything. You want to have a shallow depth of field assignment that makes the viewers go, wow, how did you guys do that? And to be able to create feeling of sense of place or a completely blurred background like you see in this shot, or to have some dreamy background like you saw in the iceberg shot or the one from Tom McCall. So when you're trying to do this assignment, think about how do you make the viewers go, wow, and you will probably come away a lot better with the photos that create impact. That sum it up.
Yeah, I think I want to add one thing. When you are planning your composition, think about your subject. We tell our students this all the time. We see a lot of people saying, what should I include? How do I create a composition from this scene? Find the one thing, find the one element in the scene in front of you that is the most interesting to you. That becomes your subject, and everything else is up to you. You can include it or not include it, but think about those other elements as potential distractions. If they're distracting, find a way to get rid of them. Use a shallow depth of field to smooth their details out. Include them in the photo if they work. Don't include them if they don't. Shift your camera, move around, really get creative. That's what we want you to do with this assignment, with all our assignments. We want you to really sort of push your comfort zone, push yourself out of the box you've put yourself in, and try and get creative with it.
Okay. So that brings us to an end of our another episode. If there are any questions, just type them in the question and answer box, and we'll be happy to answer a few questions.
And thanks so much for watching the show tonight, guys. It's been great having you.
And if there are no questions, I want to make sure that I let you guys know the next show we are going to have a really special guest with us, who has been doing some crazy, amazing things, and there's militia involved in it, so and photography involved in it. So just make sure that you tune in next week, and it's going to be an awesome and an inspirational show.
Yep, we just had a really great talk with this surprise guest yesterday. We talked for quite a while, longer than we expected, and we're as excited to hear from him as I think the rest of you are going to be when you see who it is. So big deal, very exciting, and we're looking forward to our next show. So thanks everybody for your really kind comments too. We're getting a lot of really positive feedback. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Margaret, and see you next week.
All right, bye everybody.